Way up in the mountains, you'd expect to be served a hot chocolate or a hot toddy. But a rum sour? You would think that's more of a beach cocktail. Thanks to our guest today, you would be wrong. It's home right here in Crested Butte, Colorado. I'm Susan Schwartz, your drinking companion, and this is Lush Life Podcast. Every week, we are inspired to live life one cocktail at a time by the best in the industry. I'm not sure why anyone would doubt that Karen Hoskin could create a rum distillery in the Colorado mountains. This is a woman who was an elite firefighter. There is probably nothing she couldn't do. She was in London for the UK RumFest when I had a chance to discover what led her to open Montanya Distillers high above sea level. But first, don't forget to head over to lushlifecocktailtours.com to buy your ticket to the tastiest tour in town. London town, that is. Soho, to be more exact. You'll be introduced to some of the most famous bars and bartenders in London, all while sipping their celebrated cocktails and learning about Soho's drinking history. We even have gift vouchers, so buy your ticket now and enjoy it later, after you hear Karen's story. Now let's get on with the show. Why don't you tell me about your background?
Well, I was born in the Bronx. My parents knew from day one that they were going to get out of the Bronx at some point, but my dad was in law school and they were living in this tiny little apartment that you could basically touch both walls of the apartment at the same time. So when the kids came along, they bailed to Maine. And I grew up in Maine.
Were your parents from the Northeast originally?
They're from outside of New York City, okay. Bronxville. So they're Westchester County folk. But my parents knew so early on that they wanted to be in Maine. My dad's parents had a little cottage up in Maine that they would go to in the summer, and they just loved it. So we moved to Maine, and I lived there all the way until I went off to college when I was 18.
Mm-hmm. And where did you stay in the Northeast for college?
I did. I went to Williams College, which is up in the Berkshire Mountains in Massachusetts, a little liberal arts college, but an incredible education. And I always joke and say the liberal arts education just basically teaches you how to not say no. You know, it's this thing about, of course I can do that. I don't care what it is. I'll figure it out. I know how to figure it out. I have the tools to figure it out.
My dad always said that the liberal arts education taught you how to think.
Yes.
I don't know if that's true, where you get out knowing how to think, but that's why it wasn't so important to know your trade yet, because he had been like, oh, biology, I'm going to be a doctor. And he's like, wait a sec, I forgot to learn how to think about anything else. So I totally agree with you.
My kids are both in universities where they started on day one with their major, and I've always thought that was a little sad. I'm like, take philosophy, take Buddhism. I want them to have a more well-rounded education than just their field, but that's what I did. So
saying that, I guess you didn't know really, or please correct me if I'm wrong, what you wanted to do when you grew up, kind of going into university.
Not even coming out of university. I didn't have a clue. When I left college, I just got in my car and drove to San Francisco. I had no idea what kind of job I was going to look for. I had no idea what work I wanted. I just knew that I was somewhat obsessive about some of the same principles that I'm obsessive about now: sustainability, social responsibility, taking care of people. So I went and worked for a political consulting firm in San Francisco for quite a while.
But you thought San Francisco, or at least California, would have those answers? As opposed to East Coast?
I did. I sort of saw San Francisco as this shining beacon of, you know, liberalism and all of the things that I cared about at the time. And so I was going to go check it out. And working on political campaigns in San Francisco was quite an education. And it was right about the time that the protests against the the war in Afghanistan were happening. And so they were flipping cars and lighting things on fire in the streets of San Francisco in 1990. And so I was really in the middle of something.
Were you like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted to be, where I wanted to be? Or were you like, ooh, I should have gone to East Coast.
Exactly. I was like, wow, this is a little extreme for me. But
So, San Francisco, there's, a bar scene there. Did you
have anything to do with that bar scene?
I did, except that I was pretty dead broke. That was the biggest problem of my whole time in San Francisco, was that I was a political organizer. I wasn't making any money. I had a really expensive, beautiful apartment with some friends from school. And so what I got better at than going to bars was creating a bar in my own beautiful apartment where all of my friends would come and I would make cocktails all evening. So that was early on for me. That was an identity that I had in my dorm room in college. Because I didn't drink beer and didn't go to those keg parties, I would always make cocktails in my room, and friends would come over and we'd have more of this sort of, sultry, sophisticated environment than the sort of hammerhead keg parties of school. So
now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is age 21 to drink. Was it then?
It was. Yes. Not when I was at Williams, though. Well, it was in
because some states had changed. Because when I was 19 in New York, you could still drink. There's a grandfather clause.
Over the border to Vermont, which was only like 5 minutes away. So we'd ride our bikes out to Vermont in college and buy alcohol in the Vermont liquor stores legally, and then come back.
So why rum? Why, or should I say, why couldn't you drink beer?
Celiac. I was not diagnosed then, but I just knew that it made me feel terrible. Okay. And there were a lot of foods that made me feel terrible.
A lot of people didn't know they were celiac then.
It took a long time, till about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I
love that you were already a bartender in college.
Yeah, well, I had bartending jobs in the summer in Bar Harbor, Maine, and in Camden, Maine, and in Portland, Maine, and I would get these jobs in these really high-end bars, and the things we were making back then are kind of hilarious now, like amaretto sours and,
my favorite, fuzzy navel.
Fuzzy navels and white Russians. And, we didn't know how uncool that was going to eventually be.
I think it's retro now.
It
may be cool.
Well, I make a drink in my bar that is like a white Russian, but it's made with really good rum, and we make our own coffee infusion, and so there are ways to elevate even some of those original cocktails. But I just, from an early time, I loved making cocktails for people. But I also recognized that I didn't love gin. Gin made me sick. Mm-hmm. Vodka was just boring. It didn't have any benefit to the cocktail. Whiskey was too much. It was like a punch in the face when I was 20, 21. But rum just was my spirit from such an early time. And then I would start looking around for better and better rums.
Do you remember the first ones? it was a while ago, but...
Oh, yes. I remember exactly where I was, exactly what I was doing. I was in India for... a college year in India, and I went to a bar in Goa, and I was sitting at the bar talking to this bartender, and he kept trying to feed me, port and all these really fortified wines in general, and they just weren't to my taste at that point. I've developed a bit of a taste for them now, but when he handed me this Old Monk rum, which is not the most fantastic rum. It's over-sweetened, it's over-colored, it's not considered to be a premium rum. Mm-hmm. But to me, at the age of 19, it was a premium rum. And it was aged. So it was the first time I tasted that robust kind of flavor of age on a spirit. And that was the beginning for me, where I thought, this is the spirit I'm going to become more educated about. I'm going to find better and better versions of this. And that just led to a lifetime of exploration.
What's interesting to me is that you found you didn't like beer, but you still wanted to drink something. And so, you did skip over that you were a bartender during college, and that you still wanted to enjoy alcohol. That was definitely a part of your life.
Sure.
Even in college, when I was thinking, I'm going to drink this horrible stuff. Obviously, it didn't make me sick, but I drank a lot of really bad beer without even thinking about, maybe there's something else out there other than the fuzzy navel.
Well, and I think that's a reality of being celiac, is you just start to figure out what is it that's going to make me not feel awful the next day. Because it's not like a hangover. It's like the flu, right? So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what can I consume. This is what all my friends are doing. Everybody's hanging out and drinking. How can I come up with a way to do this that is sustainable for me, where the next day I'll wake up and feel great? So that first sip of rum on that beach in India, I just remember waking up the next morning after being with all these Brits who were there for a yoga retreat. And we drank fairly, it wasn't heavily because I never have been a heavy drinker, but we had some cocktails that night. And I woke up the next morning feeling like $1 million. I went out and like ran on the beach, and I thought, that's how I want to feel the next day. And as a bartender, you can't help but be aware that you're purveying things to other people, that you want them to feel good the next day too. You want them to wake up and feel like they had an experience and not a headache. And so that became kind of a thing for me as a bartender, was how can I give my consumers an experience that's going to make them feel okay the next day.
Of course. Now, when you went back to the States after your time in India, were you looking for Old Monk? Did you originally go, I've got to find this stuff again? And
I did.
You did? And, or I was going to say, if you didn't find it, how long, did you have to then, or should I say, did your rum education begin then? Did you?
It really began then, because this was more than 30 years ago. There weren't great premium rums on any shelf of any liquor store. It was all just the mass market brands for the most part. But I started trying to find some more premium styles that I could actually buy. When you said that about Old Monk, there must have been a brand ambassador for Old Monk in Massachusetts at the time, because
it's really early on to have someone
something, I don't know, and so every now and then you'd see it on the shelf of a bar in Boston, and I would go to Boston on a fairly regular basis for various school-related things, and I would find Old Monk, and that was just like that first thing that you have an amazing experience with, when you taste it again, it's like it conjures up not only what you tasted, but also where you were, who you were with, what your memories of that time are, and they're so sacred and special. And so even though I don't drink Old Monk now, it's sacred to me. And when I was in India a couple of years ago, I hiked 9 miles from a dry state in India into a state where you could buy alcohol just to buy a tiny bottle of Old Monk, just for old time's sake.
I hope someone from Old Monk is listening to this. But, really there wouldn't be a Montanya if there hadn't been an Old Monk.
No,
so it's definitely related. All right, well, we still have a lot to get to before we talk about Montanya. So you came back from India, or you're a political consultant in San Francisco, making your own house a bar. What were the steps? Of course, there are a lot of steps, but to get to start Montanya, between the drinking the first glass to setting up your own shop, really.
Well, I knew pretty quickly when I got to San Francisco that I was going to have to get out. I'm not a city person. And it took going to San Francisco, after growing up in Maine, being in the Berkshires, it was really my first urban living experience. And it was pretty quick that I figured out that was not my thing. I spent my weekends, this was in the early days of mountain biking, and I spent my weekends with my mountain bike out in the Marin Headlands, just out of the city.
Because San Francisco, if there's any city that's the most outdoory kind of city, that's San Francisco.
It was a fairly good fit that way, but to be broke in San Francisco, with a mountain bike and riots, and I was consuming too much news, I discovered. They had the morning paper, the San Francisco Chronicle, and then they had the evening paper, the Examiner, and I was listening to a lot of NPR, and I just, at some point, I was like, I can't work in political consulting all day, read the paper in the morning, read the paper at night, listen to NPR on my commute in my company car. It was a pretty sweet gig, but I just couldn't do it anymore. I knew that. It was sort of crushing my soul. And so my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, was living in Flagstaff, Arizona. he was an environmental consultant, and he wrote me this tiny little note, handwritten on a piece of paper that said, "Just got a new apartment, plenty of room for 2." And so I packed up my car not long after that and drove to Flagstaff, Arizona, where I didn't have a job, prayed that I was going to get something. And, again, my husband is famous for always saying, well, what do you want to do? And I think about it. And in this case, I said, I want to be a hotshot, which is a wildland firefighter.
Oh, boy.
And so I got a job with a fire crew. As soon as I got there, it was perfect timing. I moved in May, got a job with a fire crew, and that was the beginning of an era of schlepping a chainsaw through the woods for a long time and just really pushing myself physically in the mountains, fighting fires. It was, not like it is now where it's just raging in all directions quite often. But we had some scary, intense fire experiences, and taught me a lot about myself and my courage and my capacity.
You are fearless. That does not come across, in the other interviews I have listened to. Yes.
Yeah, so that was a lovely period of time. It also solidified my relationship with my now husband, who we've been together for 30 years. And but it also was when I looked at the whole idea of starting a brewery, because I could sense and I could feel this craft brewing thing coming, and I absolutely loved it. I loved everything about it except the beer.
Was there a lot of that happening in Flagstaff at that time?
No, but soon after it was printing money, so like the new breweries started up maybe 2 years after we were flirting with that idea. And we just, we realized that this was my husband and me together. We realized we didn't have enough money. We realized we really wanted to travel more, that we were going to be anchored to this business for 5 to 10 years with, just all of our hearts and souls, and that I didn't love beer. And so I was going to, be like...
that would have been the first thing. Ding, 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 ding. But what's interesting to me, God, I keep saying that, but is that while you're firefighting, you're thinking about creating something,
right?
And that you have that entrepreneurial instinct. I want to start something. Why do you think it developed into this idea of a brewery? What do you think? What was it about that creative process?
I think I've always been attracted to being a maker, but I'm, I know what my skills are and what they aren't. So I don't like to sew. I don't like to, paint. And so my whole career from that moment on became being a maker. So I decided not to do the brewery. But
why, since you're a rum drinker, why do you think it became a brewery, not then a rum distillery?
Because it wasn't even a concept then. Like, there was whiskey being made in Kentucky, basically, but this was so far prior to the craft spirits movement. If I had had an inkling in that moment that you could make a distillery in Flagstaff, Arizona, believe me, I would have probably jumped on it, but I also probably would have driven it into the ground, because I didn't have enough money and I didn't have people I knew who could back me. And it wasn't a thing. So people would have been like, what are you doing making rum? I mean, they were like that, years later when I did do it. But I just think it would have been premature. So I had to spend some time cultivating some more skills, I think, saving some money, and doing some other things that would give me more confidence to, go that route later.
Well, when you decided that you weren't going to do the brewery, did you shelve that idea of creating some kind of spirit, like in the back of your brain? Or did you just, you must have, obviously, because we're sitting here talking about your own distillery. But, at that time, can you remember, putting it back somewhere and thinking, all right, I might revisit this later, but I'm not sure how it's going to...
I'm not sure I remember putting it away then, but I definitely remember pulling it back out later when I started to feel that exact same feeling only about spirits, so I thought, I started to imagine that this was going to be the next boom, was craft spirits. And this was before there were 2 or 3 that I knew of at the time, like Tuthill Town in New York was just starting, and Stranahan's and some of those really cool early distillers, but they were all making whiskey. And, but I remember when I started to feel that again, I was like, oh, I remember when I felt this about breweries, and look what happened with them. They just blew up and boomed and, went crazy all over the United States, and still are. And so I thought, I'm not going to miss this one. So I know I skipped a long period of time in between there, but that was really the moment where I was like, okay, this is my chance. I've got money in the bank. I've traveled the world and gotten that out of my system. I have 2 kids, and they're, they'll be fine if I work a little. I don't necessarily want to be on the move as much. So I'm settled in a place where I can really focus on something. And I had just been to Guatemala and discovered the whole mountain tradition of rum. So there was like this perfect storm of the ding, ding, ding you talked about, only it was like, yes, everything was a yes. This is the right thing. It's the right time. It's the right place. It's the right concept.
All right, well, let's set that scene. So you're fighting fires, doing incredible things for the world. But I know that you live in Colorado now. So what was the move from Flagstaff to then get to Colorado?
Global climate change. We were living right on the edge of the Painted Desert. So we were about 40 minutes outside of Flagstaff. We had built a really sustainable house. So solar powered, off the grid. All of our water was hauled. And we started to just feel this creeping weather change. So the first years that we were there were 300 inches of snow on the San Francisco peaks. We were backcountry skiing all the time. And then it was like no snow. And so we would start making, my husband and I are both kind of obsessive backcountry and Nordic skiers. And we started migrating further and further north to try to find the snow. We ended up in Silverton, Colorado, which was just getting hammered with snow back then. And we finally bought a little tiny piece of land up there, and we thought we'll build ourselves a little cabin up there that we can go, and that'll be our escape from this encroaching heat challenge in Arizona. I remember so clearly, like on the days that we would be planning to leave for Colorado, just like feeling the heat so overwhelmingly and just being like, I have to get out of here. I'm not a hot weather person. So we would make these migrations up there, and then we built this cabin in Silverton, and then we both just cracked up because we looked at each other one day and we're like, we're moving to this cabin, aren't we? Like, we had never talked about it. It wasn't even really big enough for our family of 4. But we just both knew that was kind of what was happening. So we rented our house in Flagstaff and moved to Silverton in, 2001, I guess. So, and it was just the most amazing thing. We went from being off the grid, 40 minutes outside of town, to being right in the middle of town in this community that is just incredibly tight-knit. And that was when the idea of the distillery really began to ferment.
Now, while this was happening, you said you were in Guatemala, but were you like training your rum tongue? What were you always traveling and drinking different kinds of rum? What was that kind of rum education?
Sure. Well, again, I was the person who, for whatever reason, was always making the cocktails everywhere. At my family gatherings with my grandparents' cottage in Maine, went down to my parents, and then my father died and I inherited it. And so we would go to Maine, and it would be like a family gathering, and I would be making mojitos when nobody knew what a mojito was back in the day. And I started infusing, because of my time in India, I started infusing rum with the spices of chai. This was forever ago. Like I can't even tell you. Before I had kids. My kids are now 19 and 21. Mm-hmm. So I started infusing rum with chai spices, and then making these, homemade ginger beers and ginger ales, and making these cocktails that is now my most popular cocktail on my menu in my rum bar is called the Maharaja. And it's those cocktails cultivated over another 10 years of evolution. But my rum tongue was still pretty uncultivated then. I don't think I really had tasted enough really good rum because it was so hard to find. So I would use Methuselah, or I would use Ranz Kappa, or I would, I still understood that there was a difference between mass market Bacardi and the terrible Malibus and the spiced rums and things like that. And these, what are now sort of not the high grade versions of the aged rums. But I wasn't there yet. I didn't totally understand that. And maybe I still don't, because I still have a lot of affinity for some of those early experiences of mine with rum. I'm not very sanctimonious or snobby about rum. Mm-hmm. My feeling is people should find a rum that they like, and then over time it will change. They're going to taste something new, and they're going to get excited about something different, and over time they're going to cultivate their discernment or their interest in it. So I'm not willing to sort of make anybody feel badly about
and then they'll
like.
Go back to the first one and love it still because it reminds them of everything. Please, I love Hershey's chocolate. I get so much stick about that in England because it was the first chocolate I ever ate. So I totally, I can appreciate the green and blacks and whatever, but
and
Hershey's
smell
Kiss
is so associated with our experience, right? So all of our memories can be really heavily associated with smell. And that's what I remember the most of that first sip of rum was like just the smell of it, the butterscotch or the vanilla.
And rum does smell delicious.
Oh, it's like the best smell. I walked into a seminar room yesterday at the UK RumFest, and it was just filled with Jamaican high ester because it was a Worthy Park seminar. And I just walked in there and I was like, oh my God, I love the smell of this room. And so that was, I think I started with some earlier concepts of what rum is, but then I started to meet some really influential people in the rum world or be exposed to more interesting rums over time. And I came to the UK RumFest 10 years ago for the first time and started to get some more exposure. So I would say even when I started a distillery, I didn't know everything about rum that I needed to know. I was a bit naive and a bit undereducated. But what I do remember was going on a mission years ago before Montanya Distillers to buy all these different what I thought were high-end rums. The price point seemed high-end, whatever. And then sitting down and tasting them and being like, I don't like that one. I love that one. This one maybe tastes good, but I think it's a little over-sweetened. Or, I started to really be able to hone in on the fact that I was more of a fan of the rums that came from Central and South America than I was from the island Caribbean styles. I started to differentiate between agricole styles and, esters and congeners and what was contributing to all the flavors in the rum. It took me a long time. And I still am learning every single day. But what I loved during that time was the sense of like this whole, like stepping into the room of like, whoa, I'm sure people feel this when they're into whiskey or scotch or something. They step into the room with the scotch people and they're like, whoa, I wouldn't have had that with the scotch people, but I fully had that with the rum people. The first time I met another person who was like, no, I'm a serious rum fan. I was like, what? Like, I've never met another serious rum fan. For 10 years, probably, I hadn't met another.
So you weren't, a rum tourist, as I say. Like, did you go to the islands? So you were in Guatemala just to go to Guatemala, and you happened upon their rum?
Well, first I was in Belize to go to Belize, and I happened upon their rum, which is, like the 1 barrels, the 5 barrels. And I, they're fine, like nothing special there. But the thing I discovered in Belize was Marie Sharp's, which is this hot sauce that this woman named Marie has been making in Belize forever. And it's sort of the national product of Belize. And everybody who's ever been to Belize is like, oh yeah, of course, Marie Sharp's. And she created this amazing company that was doing business as a force for good in Belize, because Belize was pretty poor when she started. She was using locally grown ingredients, carrots in her case, and chili peppers, and she was making something really quite exceptional. But it was really her story and her mission and what she wanted to give back to her community, and she, the schools and the people, and that resonated for me even more than the rum. Mm-hmm. But we did drive around all these back roads trying to find the distillery of 1 barrel, and eventually I remember seeing the wash tanks and the, like in the distance, but you couldn't get through the fence, and it was like they didn't get the concept of a tasting room, right, or like a public interface. So, but then we went to that same trip, we went to Guatemala, and that's where I discovered that there was this whole concept of mountain rum. So, in my rum world, people have a lot of different feelings about Ronzacapa. It's Solera method, which, in the world of aging is not as well respected as some of the other types of aging. It's got, added sweetening, etc. Whatever. Again, I don't really care, because it was a pivotal moment for me discovering Ronzacapa, discovering the XO Ronzacapa, which, is their kind of elevated spirit, learning that they did take their barrels up to 7,000 feet in the mountains to age, trying to understand why would you do that, what makes sense about that process. That was the beginning of my excitement about learning more about sugarcane. I'm kind of a geek about sugarcane because I have had to spend so much time figuring out how to source sustainable sugarcane. I've had to really learn a lot about how it's grown and where it's grown and what are the challenges. But Ronzacapa was the aha moment. And, I sometimes hate the fact that in my rum world, that's, again, people sort of shake their heads like, oh, Ronzacapa, roll their eyes, whatever. But for me, it was learning about a mountain tradition of rum that was the aha moment.
When you were there, were you already thinking about the distillery? I mean, was that was about creating?
That trip was the birth.
Okay.
I was thinking
the Eureka moment.
I was thinking about a career change.
Okay.
And I'd been a brand builder and a graphic designer for 12 years at that point. I was doing people's logos and designing their marketing campaigns and their websites. I was self-taught on all levels. So that was when I referred to then spending quite a lot of time being a maker. I was making, collaterals for other people's companies. I would design trade show booths and all of this stuff. And at the end of every project, I would just hand it over to someone else and say, here you go. Good luck. I hope your business does great. And I had said to my husband at the beginning of that trip, sitting on Tobacco Key in Belize, I had said, I just give everything I do away. Mm-hmm. I want to keep it at the end of the day. I want my own brand. I want to build my own brand. And he had a business at the time that could support us if I kind of gave up my graphic design clients. And so then learning about the mountain tradition, that began a real passionate exploration.
All of a sudden you were like, wait a sec, I still wanted that brewery. Now it's
right.
That little thing was unlocked in your brain.
Exactly. And then there's, a mountain tradition, not just in Guatemala, but in Colombia and in Panama and all these other places where they came to recognize the value of temperature change in the barrel, altitude, pressure, mountain water, all these things that I had never once heard in the rum world because, people in
it's
the
usually
Caribbean,
island stuff.
right? They get
hot.
water from rain, and rain has heavy metals, and so they filter it. They RO filter it, and so it's not something that they talk with pride about like they do in Scotland about the water that really contributes so much of the minerality to Scotch.
And in Colorado, you're surrounded by water, aka snow. You know, it's water.
Exactly. We are in the capital of the best water in the world. There's no question. And the water that I use comes down as snow and rain and percolates 350 feet through the ground to get to an aquifer. That is where I pull it from. And so imagine, back in high school, I don't know if you had to do this back in your high school, but in biology, you'd have to build like the filtration system. They'd give you like the little plastic box that had, and you'd
with
like
the levels,
and you'd like layer different things on, and you would have to demonstrate how you filtered water. Well, I had such clear memories of that. And so I could picture how, like if you can pull your water from an aquifer after natural filtration through moss or stone or, material, just natural material, then you're not going to have to RO filter it, reverse osmosis filter it, and then you're going to get a more flavorful water component. And water is 60% of what's in any bottle of rum, any bottle of any spirit, but any bottle of rum, if it's at 80 proof. Not always. Some of these higher proof spirits are not. They don't have that high a content. But so that was, again, like this whole thinking process of like, okay, mountain tradition, really good water filtration. So then, of course, I moved on to sugarcane. I was like, sugarcane. Okay, so where's the best sugarcane? And at the time, I gravitated toward the Hawaiian growers because I felt more sustainable. I went deep on looking at Paraguay and Uruguay organic sugarcane, and I couldn't get comfortable with the child labor portion of it. Like there was, you can't grow something that's organic and say it's organic and then have kids, out in the field chopping cane with cobras and, whatever.
But you're not paying like a cent a minute.
Exactly. And overexposed to the, elements and underhydrated and all that stuff. So that was the beginning of my thinking about like, how do I find sugarcane that I can feel good about the industry? So I started buying from Hawaii, but I would buy it out of the commodity market in California from HC&S, which is Hawaii Cane and Sugar Company. It was just pretty clear to me pretty early on that I didn't think it was what they were telling me it was. So I asked HC&S to certify that it was American grown, because then I could feel better about some of the environmental aspects. And they wouldn't. And they said, in order for us to certify it, you have to take it directly from us in Hawaii and ship it yourself. You can't take it out of the market in California. So then I started pricing that out, and I was like, that is insanely expensive. Like I can't even fathom how I would ever make a bottle of rum out of that sugarcane. So that was the beginning of my search for a mainland sugarcane supplier, which I eventually found after 5 years of hard work. But they walked into my distillery, these growers from Louisiana, and that was the beginning of this beautiful family relationship where she's from Crested Butte. She was born in Crested Butte, Colorado. She grew up in the Gunnison Valley. They met in my town, and they're sugarcane growers in Louisiana. So that's a whole other, I just skipped like years forward, but it's just an example of what I have been doing, which is really working hard to know about every impact and every aspect of the business and try to be a good steward.
Of course. Well, let's just, for everyone, go back to Guatemala a little. So when you got back, or should I say when you got back from Guatemala, you're like, okay, this is it. This is it.
It was crazy. I was like, it is so it. Luckily, my husband was in his company, had a very seasonal aspect to it. So in May, when we got back from this trip, he was kind of in a chill time of his work. So I was like, will you help me? And he was like, of course.
Does he like rum as well? As much as you?
He does now. I wouldn't say that he was as much of a fanatic about it back then.
Okay.
He's been more of a, I think back then he would have said he was a gin guy.
Okay. But he was with you.
He was like, so with me. Yeah. And he's got so many amazing skills that I do not have. And so, like, literally from May 1st to November 1st, we created a distillery. I mean, it was, I can't even tell you all the things that we did in that time, but chose a still, ordered a still from Portugal, had it shipped, got the TTB paperwork submitted, watched like every single video about distilling on the American Distilling Institute website, and read, bought the books of like, the coffee table books like Rum by David Broom, and read everything. I was just like somewhat obsessed, and we both had our day jobs and 2 kids. So it was and I was building a preschool at the time because there was no preschool in my town. And so I was like raising, $1 million to build a preschool and raising these 2 small children. And, anyway, you can imagine. It was crazy times. But at the same time, I was like creating a bar inside our distillery and creating a cocktail menu for that bar.
Did you have space in the distill? I mean, you had to find a place to actually have a distillery.
Right. We found this amazing 800 square foot building.
Oh boy.
That was freestanding, and it had been a brothel. And it had like 4-hour firewalls of stone, So in the world of distilling, you worry a lot about firewalls and trench drains and, how can you make the fire department, the fire inspectors, the IBC, all the international building code, how can you make all of them happy?
All right.
This building was perfect.
It was like it was there for you. It was waiting for you.
And it was cheap. This was Silverton when it was seriously economically depressed. And it was off the main street. So I said, yeah, let's sign a lease on this building. And it had a little, I think it was almost like someone's kitchen originally. I think this was a private house originally. But someone had turned it into a little, nightclub in the meantime, tiny nightclub. And I had gone dancing there before, so I knew about it. So there was this little L-shaped bar. It was tiny.
It was meant to be.
The whole thing, it just, if I could transport you right now back to that day, it was like being in the hold of a pirate ship with a bartender. It was like the coolest little speakeasy kind of feel to it. We were only open from 4 to 7 p.m., 4 days a week. And because of this phenomenon of this thing called Silverton Mountain in the winter, which was this cult ski area that people would come from all over the world to ski at. The doors would open at 4 p.m.
Oh, that
and we would be totally standing room only. And people would try to call ahead to order their cocktails. So you
all were on something here.
Yeah, it was happening. And so then we slowly were incrementally increasing our hours and our days of the week. Well, we still call last call at 9 p.m. Always. That will never change.
So what I was going to say is, you can watch as many. I could watch as many videos that the American Distilling, have on YouTube, but I definitely wouldn't know how to make a rum. Sure. Did you, were you? I don't want to use the word scared, but did you think, God, that the liquid that's going to come out, is it going to be good enough? How did you know what?
Well, the reason I was most scared was because reel back in time, I had decided, and I probably shouldn't say this on, live, but I decided to make rum on my stovetop at home. And so being from Maine, being raised in a lobster fishing family where I would go out with my uncle and pull pots in the Penobscot Bay of Maine, you have to have a lobster pot. Everybody from Maine has a lobster pot, right? It doesn't matter if you live in Colorado. turns out a lobster pot's a great way to make rum. So put it on the stovetop, elevate a little section in the middle, out of the
Be careful
wash.
what you say here.
Yeah.
People may be doing it. Oh, right. No, I'm deep.
And then, I just turned the domed lid of the lobster pot over, which created the condensation, cooled it a little bit from the top, and it would drip the rum back into the little cup on the little raised thing in the middle.
Uh-huh.
So, but the rum, I was like, that is not the best thing I've ever tasted. Of course, it wasn't aged, and I didn't understand cuts yet. I didn't understand how to make cuts. So it had heads in it, it had tails in it, it was all confused. So there was a lot of learning to do after that.
Did you have the idea of the taste of an old monk in your head when you were? No,
I was pretty sure that what I was doing, and the reason I was doing it, was to create unsweetened rum.
Okay.
Because all the rums, the Old Monk, the Methuselah, the Ranzacapas, the Diplomaticas, everything was too sweet for me. I don't have much of a sweet palate, and so what I realized I would spend time doing was trying to tone down the sweetness of the rum in all the cocktails that I made. So a lot of times you get a sweet cocktail with rum because it just means you're not fighting the spirit. Now in this age of these premium rums that are unsweetened, and there's this beautiful movement toward eliminating sugar.
Right. And regulation.
Eliminating additive sugar after distillation. Then all of a sudden you don't have to fight the rum anymore. You can make these incredible daiquiris and incredible, rum old fashions, and it doesn't have to be sweet anymore. And so that was like an aha moment for me, was I'm doing this to make the rum I want to drink, because it doesn't yet in my world exist.
And how long did that take between setting up the still to what you...
The first batch
came out. Fantastic.
And I was happy with it. The only thing I wasn't happy with was that we were only able to age it for like 6 weeks before we opened the doors. And so the first rums were really green, really fresh, and needed some age, I thought. And so now, the rums I've been serving at the UK Rum Festival are 3 and 4 years aged, 2, 3, 4 years aged, and we're about to release a new 4-year. And, for some people, they probably think that doesn't sound like a whole lot of age, but most rums that you read the age statement on, if it says it's 7 years, a lot of times that's the oldest rum in the bottle.
So it may even be a drop.
It may be a couple ounces of 7-year, and everything else is younger. Every rum that I make is a single barrel, and it's 100% aged for the time that I say it is. It's not blended. And so if it's a 4-year-old, it's all 4 years old. And so that's been my big coup of the last decade, is to try to age more rum for longer. People always say, well, why don't you have a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old? And I'm like, because I had to sell it all to survive.
Well, I was going to bring that up. So you said the first batch, you were, this is it. I'm great. Well,
so good.
You obviously wanted to make this a business. When did you, or how did you get the word out there? And also, was it always called Montanya? Did you say, we're going to call it Montanya?
Yes.
Which, to me, is the French word for mountain, but
it's also the Spanish word.
Oh, the Spanish word? See, I don't speak Spanish.
For mountain. It was, like, literally the decision to call it Montanya took 42 seconds.
Okay.
I don't know how it just emerged, but that was the name from the beginning that I was like, that's the name. But I also knew that we couldn't spell it with the traditional Spanish Nye, or the tilde on the N, because people would say, in the US would say Montana. We didn't want to be Montana rum.
Right.
So I added the Y to be Montanya rum so that we could trademark it, so it was unique to us.
And people would actually pronounce it correctly when they said it.
Ideally, that would be, how cool would that be? No, everybody says Montanya. And a lot of people say a lot of really interesting things. My approach is just to repronounce it back to them when they
as long as they're
it
drinking
wrong.
it, they can call it whatever
that's
they want.
exactly how I feel. And like you said it, that makes me happy.
So, how many did you start from day one? Okay, I've got a bottle of it. I'm going to start to sell it, introduce it to everyone I can,
We did, yeah. So that first bottling was like 400 and something bottles of rum. And we had this tasting room. So we opened the doors and we poured tastes and we made cocktails. And it was busy and vibrant from the first minute. And then I was just telling the story yesterday in a seminar with Richard Seal that I would pack the truck I could fit 44 cases in the cab of the pickup truck. I wouldn't put it in the back because I didn't have a cover. And I would leave the distillery, and I wasn't allowed to, by my own set of rules, I wasn't allowed to come home until I had sold it all. So I'd drive to Boulder and walk into a liquor store and say, hey, I'm making this craft rum in Colorado, and do you want some? And they would say, sure. To a person. They would taste it, and then they would say, yeah, sure. And the label was janky as heck back then. It was, even though I was a brand builder, it's come a long way since then. I didn't know how to design a liquor brand. I was really shooting from the hip. But I would go out, sell the 44 cases, take their checks, come home, deposit them, be home with my kids for a week, pack the truck up, go out with another 44 cases, sell those. It was so organic. It always has been really organic. And then I walked into Republic National Distributing Company in Denver. The multi-million, I think they're a multi-billion-dollar company. Walked through the floor-to-ceiling door into the corner office with the president of R&DC. They were distributing so many of the big brands that you know of. And I met with the sort of leaders of R&DC, this man, Jim Smith, who still is he passed away a couple of years ago, which was devastating to me because he was my first real supporter in the industry. And I said, do you guys want to carry our rum and distribute it for us in Colorado? And he said, sure. And I was like, wait, did you just say yes?
Where's the battle here? Wait, I thought I was going to have to fight.
Yeah.
Right?
No. And, and R&DC Colorado has been in my corner in such a huge way for so long. And they have, they've sold more rum than I can even talk about. And they've grown their business with us every quarter consistently, double digits. It's rare for them to have a quarter that isn't, 12, 14, 17% growth on the brand. Without us having a single paid sales rep in the market, we don't have, we're not pumping money, we're not paying for placements, we're just working closely,
making good stuff
with these people who we love. So, I know that to many people, they don't talk about the distribution side very much because it's kind of unsexy, but I am so grateful for that relationship. They've taught me a lot about the language. They taught me to speak the language of distribution, free goods and all the things that you say when you're talking to reps, that's the language they understand.
Of course. Well, let's talk about the liquid itself. So you had this fabulous first run. How did it grow? Because you have a lot of other expressions. Kind of talk me through how it went. Yeah. Why did you decide to add more, or not just continue with that one?
Right. Well, we started with the Platino and the Oro from day one. The two, our 2-year-old rums that are kind of the core of our business. And we put out, we went into a lot of competitions early on just to try to understand and get validation from the judge community. And we won 24 gold and silver medals right off the bat. And so, so that was exciting for us to be like, we're not the only ones that think this is good, because it could have been. We could have been sitting there in our little old brothel in Silverton, Colorado, drinking rum and being like, we think it's good. Does anybody else think it's good? So that kind of put us on the map, I would say, where people were paying attention. People in the rum world were paying attention. And then I would say it took a long time for me to have the bandwidth to even think about any other releases. But the Exclusiva, which was our first other release, is only, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. I wish I remembered exactly. And that came about because I had a mentor early on who was this guy, Jake Norris. He was making whiskey in Denver for Stranahan's. Amazing, just committed craft distiller, very obsessed with process, very obsessed with fermentation. And, you know, he was just the geek I needed at that time. And we would meet for a drink in a dive bar in Denver and just talk for hours about everything. And he never cut me off. He never said, you're not going to be able to pull this off. He never said, what a stupid idea to make rum. He just was like...
Which I'm assuming that a lot of people did.
Oh, yeah. People were like, rum is not a mountain thing. I'm like, yes, it is. And I would educate people, but it took a long time to really get people over that hump. But so Jake was at the time, he was making this whiskey called the Snowflake. You could only get it at the distillery. People would line up around the distillery for the release because, you know, and at night, like the night before, to get their spot. And it was just so unique. It was the first time I'd really encountered this concept of, you know, double and triple maturation, where you're taking something and putting it in a finishing barrel. That's not really part of the world of rum. Rum people tend to blend, you know, they pick different spirits from different barrels and they put them together to get those subtleties. I've always been a single barrel rum. So for me, I wasn't looking for a blend to create a blend. I wasn't looking to put up different barrels of different styles and then put them together. I discovered with Jake this concept of double maturation, triple maturation. And he was making the Snowflake where he took the whiskey out of a new whiskey barrel, which is what they have to do, is put it in a new barrel. He'd age it for, I don't know, 3 years or something in the new whiskey barrel, and then he would finish it in a Cabernet Franc French oak barrel. And I'm not much of a whiskey fan. I loved that stuff. I loved that Snowflake. I would, you know, beg him as like my geeky friend to save me a bottle of it. Would he please? And of course he was amazing that way, and he did. And that was the beginning of the Exclusiva. So I was like, okay, I want to take the Oro and age it a little longer, 2.5 years, and then move it into a French oak barrel that previously held port. That was again, there are all these little nods that you see in the company to things. So Montanya, Oro, Platino, Exclusiva, the Spanish, is a nod to the fact that I discovered my rum tradition in Central America, in the Spanish-speaking regions of the world. And I am still more affiliated with those traditions. Like, I think some of the more exciting rums right now are going to be coming out of like Medellin, Colombia. People are excited about Claren from Haiti. You know, I love it. I love juice, you know, whole juice, fresh juice made rum. But that's not going to be my go-to. I tend to be really affiliated with these like cane syrup rums or whole cane rums, or, you know, rums that take the whole sugarcane juice and cook it for a period of time and then use the products of that cooking process. That's what I do. So I'm only 12% molasses. Most rum makers are 100% molasses. I use the percentage of molasses that's in the original stock of sugarcane. Okay. And I use all the rest of it too, but it's had the water and the fibrous solids removed for me by my mill in Louisiana. So that was the Exclusiva. I was like, I wanted to move it into a cask of some sort. I had a winery in Colorado that I just loved, and that is hard for me to say because there are a lot of wineries in Colorado that I do not love. But this one winery called Sutcliffe is being made by this Brit in this like red sandstone growing area. It was the most unusual, again, like the most unusual winery in the world. The
in
wine,
Colorado,
right?
Which...
The wine was exceptional. It's sold, sells for $40 a bottle in Colorado. It's very highly prized. And I went to them and said, "Can I get some barrels from your Cabernet Sauvignon, your port?" They do double. They take this. They first age the Cabernet and then age the port. And they said, "Sure." So I started getting barrels from them. Started aging this Exclusiva. Brought it out at 3 years. And I was like, I'm home. Its finish is so dry and tannic, doesn't have any added sugar, has a minuscule, tiny touch of added honey from the bees around our distillery. Non-traditional in the rum world, but I don't care. I've been non-traditional in the rum world since day one. That's what you tasted the other day at the sketch event, and that's what I did a tasting of on this ship on the Thames on Thursday night, which was so fun. And so yeah, I mean that's where that came from. And then I went to triple maturation with the Anniversaria, where I then took that Exclusiva and put it into a bourbon cask at the end. Ooh. And the bourbon cask, this was a celebration of our 10th anniversary, so it was a nod to my other mentor, which is the guys who started Peach Street Distillers, a very farm-connected, beautiful distillery in Palisade, Colorado. I don't hear about them as much anymore, but they are really one of the originals for me, making a bunch of different spirits. So they made vodka, gin, whiskey. They also made brandies. They made this pear brandy that they put the bottles out in the orchard around the pears and grew the pears inside the bottles and then put the pear brandy in. So when you bought the pear brandy, it had a full grown pear inside the bottle. Amazing people. And they also mentored and taught me from a very early point. They also had a beautiful tasting room, which Jake Norris's distillery did not have. So, they weren't making craft cocktails yet. We were really one of the first in Colorado and in the United States to have a craft cocktail program in our distillery. But they were making cocktails in their distillery, and I was like, you can do that? So that started, I mean, we had that from the very beginning, but before I actually opened the doors, I realized what was possible legally, what was possible with the regulatory environment in Colorado, which has been incredibly favorable to distillers because of the beer world, I think, and the wine world. So, yeah, that was this. So then triple maturation came along, bourbon cask from Peach Street, to say thank you in series to all of my mentors for our 10th anniversary. And then we sold it off at $100 a bottle, very quickly, and had to do a second release of it, sold that off quickly, and donated a bunch of money to the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory and the Women's Distillery Guild. So the Biological Laboratory has the longest running consecutive collected data on climate change in the world, happens to be in the valley in which I live. And the Women's Distillery Guild was an organization that I founded to try to do a better job of providing support and mentorship to younger distillers, younger distillery founders coming up in the system, wanting to do a distillery but not really knowing how, or feeling like there were not enough women to admire in the process. So we kind of created this ability for the younger distillers to connect with the older distillers and get mentored in different ways. Mm-hmm. That's been incredibly satisfying. We just merged in with Women of the Vine and Spirits, which is a New York-based industry group, and now it's kind of blown up.
Now, usually at this point, I would be like, I just have to try some of that Anniversario and let's have a drink. But I really want you to touch on something that you brought up a little bit, because I think it's so important. And it's something that in doing research on you, I found that it's a big part of your distillery, which is sustainability. And I don't want to leave you without talking about all the different things that you do to make your distillery sustainable that maybe other people who are listening might want to do as well. So could you tell me a little bit more about that or describe it?
Sure. Well, we're the only certified B Corp rum distillery in the world. We're only one of 3 certified distilleries in the world. The B Corp is the gold standard, I believe, and I think most people believe, of third-party verification of environmental and social responsibility claims. So you could say all day that, and many rum distilleries are starting to say, we are sustainable, we are, we believe, we care. But if you go deep, you know that it's just a marketing campaign. Mm-hmm. It's not part of their deep ethos. For me, and I don't really, I could go all the way back to my childhood on a pond in Maine, talking to my dad about the black duck and protecting, he was very upset about the EPA telling him we couldn't build our house close to a pond. And that was the beginning of me arguing with my dad over environmental stuff. And he came a long way in his lifetime. He passed away 22 years ago, but he came a long way toward becoming an environmentalist. But I guess I kind of came out of the womb that way or something, because it's been important to me from the very beginning. And so it's not something in Montanya that we decided, hey, let's try to do this. It's kind of trendy. People care. Let's get a certification here or something. It's like deeply ingrained in the business. So, with the B Corp, they evaluate 200 different aspects of how you do business, from where you bank to, because banks invest in oil and gas exploration and for deforestation in Brazil and things like that. And so, they care about every single thing you do as a company. Where does your trash go? How much solid waste is leaving your building? Where does your energy come from? Are you using GMO products? What is your packaging like? How is the paper that you make all your printed materials with? I could go on for a really long time, but I would bore the heck out of everybody, I think. But it's a really deep analysis. So first you go through the self-analysis and you answer all the 200 questions and you provide some documentation. And then they audit you. So in order to be certified, you get a random selection of all of those questions, and they go deeper with you and they audit the physical evidence, whatever it is. They might even call your, waste management, or they might call your power company or something to verify. And so we did that. It took about 6 months. I hired an intern to kind of shepherd the process with me because I had a lot of other things to do. And we got our B Corp certification, and it just, to me, it's like, it allows people to not just take my word for it. So if people go to our website at montanyarum.com, they'll find a list of all the daily practices of the company, from the bar and restaurant, doing everything possible to reduce our waste. We're not zero waste yet. I actually am worried that we're never going to get to the zero waste point, because I don't trust the recycling world anymore, and recycling is unraveling. And so I could say, yes, I took my plastic to the recycling properly, but I don't know that it's getting properly handled on the other side of that. So, but we do so many things. Like, we buy all of our merchandise, our logo shirts and our logo hats are made from recycled material, or various different fabrics, sustainable fabrics, not just organic cotton that came over from China, but like real reused material. Same with our hats. The plastic closures and things are recycled plastic made from old water bottles. Like, it goes so deep. When we went on our retreat this year, we had some new staff, and I forgot to tell them that they can't use single-use cups and single-use lunch containers and things like that, that the whole retreat was going to be zero waste. And so, they got there and I was like, oh gosh, how are you going to get a coffee if we're on the road, if you didn't bring a cup? So we had to turn around and like go get cups for everybody. And now I like carry, these bins of reusable coffee cups or shot glasses, or, I'm working with a new rep in New York and a new rep in New Jersey, and I have to equip them so that they're not using plastic cups. And we do all zero waste events. And I had to choose just being here at RumFest, like to not participate in events that had plastic tasting cups and things like that.
Just not so easy.
No, I have to give up some opportunities. Mm-hmm. Like at Tales of the Cocktail in Louisiana, I do all my own events. I can't participate in other people's because I can't control it. And Tales has a colossal amount of plastic involved. So I have to kind of pull out and do my own events.
Well, let's now pull out some of that rum and toast to you and what you're doing for this environment.
Okay.
Because I'm getting emotional now. All right.
Thanks so much to Karen for being on the show. If we have any female distillers out there, check out the website womenofthevine.com to find out more info and connect with others. If you want to know more about your business becoming B certified, just head to bcorporation.net. Join the club. Now, of course, it's time for that cocktail of the week. The sour is one of the oldest family of drinks, appearing in Jerry Thomas's 1862 cocktail classic recipe book, How to Mix Drinks. Technically, the sour consists of one spirit mixed with citrus and some kind of sweetener. Egg white appeared later in The Flowing Bowl by William Schmidt, written in the 1890s. The difference between a sour and a daiquiri is the citrus here is a lemon and the daiquiris is a lime. So here is Montanya Distillers' take on the classic rum sour, our cocktail of the week. In a shaker, add the following: 1 ounce fresh lemon juice, 0.75 ounces of simple syrup, 0.5 ounces of pasteurized egg white, and 2.5 ounces of Montanya's Exclusiva rum. Add ice and shake. Then pour it over a king ice cube into a rocks glass and garnish with an Amarena cherry. If you're making your simple syrup, then add 2 cups of sugar and 2 cups of water to a saucepan and bring to a boil. Stir it occasionally and then let it cool. And you can refrigerate that up to 2 weeks. You'll find this recipe, more rum recipes, and all the cocktails of the week at alushlifemanual.com, where you'll also find all the ingredients in our shop. I remember the day when I discovered rum. It was in a newfangled cocktail that was taking New York City by storm in the 90s and called the Mojito. Overnight, it was on everyone's menu and we couldn't get enough of rum. If you live for Lush Life, would you consider supporting us by buying us a coffee? Just go to buymeacoffee.com/lushlife, and you can donate once or monthly to make sure we are still here every Tuesday. Also, you know how much I love to talk about cocktails, and we can all be together talking on the flick.group/lushlife app. It's free to join and works on Android or iOS devices. Plus, you can listen to the latest episodes right there if you want to catch up. Theme music for Lush Life is by Steven Shapiro and used with permission. And Lush Life is always, and will be forever, produced by Evo Terra and Simpler Media Productions. Which leaves me to say the wise words of Oscar Wilde: all things in moderation, including moderation. And always drink responsibly. Okay, as you know, the second part was mine. Up and coming on Lush Life, we move to the other side of the world with a crash course on sake. Until next time, bottoms up.